I'm delighted to welcome a very distinguished panel that will be able to share some insights in terms of how do we make sense of the world nowadays. And I hope you guys can give us all the solutions so we can be all calm as we head into a cocktail. So with us, we have the Consul General from Germany, Andrea Sasse. We have the Consul General from Japan, Kenko Sone, Consul General. And we have the, I have to get Wendy's title correct. Give me a second. Let me pull this up here.
Just a regular lawyer. Not distinguished.
This is very distinguished. Partner at Gowling WLG, a trade lawyer based in Ottawa, Canada, Wendy Wagner. And finally, last but not least, the Consul General from Finland, Okko-Pekka Salmimies. Yeah, I always have to add the extra S. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today. So let's get started. We know that throughout today, we addressed a lot of international issues that have been changing on a daily basis since January. And every single day, we're looking at how do we make sure that this region in Los Angeles that's so dependent on international trade and international partnership are able to move forward. So let's start with a very simple question. On April 2nd, the President of the United States announced a number of different tariffs and international policies. I don't have to go through it because I don't have that chart with all the countries and all the islands with penguins that might be taxed or not taxed. But with that said, this is going to affect your countries, your regions, as well as Los Angeles and California and the United States. Maybe we'll start with Andrea. How do you anticipate that these tariffs and these policies will start affecting our supply chain and the trade relationship between your country and the United States?
I think the most important thing is to mention that regarding trade questions, it's the EU who is the partner to the US.
Yes.
So it's actually Okko-Pekka and myself speaking on behalf of the EU today, although normally we would have the Polish presidency here, of course. As you know, the EU is the largest trading partner to the US, so it does have an incredible effect, the policy. However, at the moment, it's more like the insecurity and uncertainty that is affecting the markets. As we have seen today, there's a lot of swings on the financial markets. We just talked about it, Kenko, on the sidelines. That applies to financial markets over here in the US as well as in Japan or over in Europe, and Germany in particular. Germany, as you know, is a very export-oriented country, has been for a long time. And as one of the member states of the European Union, of course, we are heavily affected by it, by the tariffs. But once again, I want to mention that there's the factor right now that is, that is crucial is the uncertainty. Mm-hmm. So companies as well as trading partners are actually trying to be on top of the game, trying to follow developments and trying to, make sense of the situation.
Excellent. Kenko?
Okay. Yeah, well, just first, in the past, I've been working on foreign ministry for more than 35 years, and I was once a kind of negotiator in the WTO. What we have been doing is to reduce the tariffs, not increase. So that mindset, I have a little bit bias about tariffs. So maybe I'm talking a little bit more than Japanese government positions. But I think in general, we also really avoid it. After, once the President Trump is inaugurated, we see that he's been always talking about tariffs, and tariff is good, and which I have really a different image about tariffs. But since then, I've been really, our government is communicating with the U.S. government that the concerns about this tariff escalation increase, and the U.S. should not take the unilateral tariff measures. But still, the U.S. finally decided to increase the tariffs to almost all the countries. To Japan, it's going to be at 24% in all products. So we really, the Japanese government really disappointed this announcement. and we see that it must really negative impact for the economy, and also it's really against the international rules, including WTO or our bilateral trade agreement. It was not, we have concern that it will inconsistent with our agreement. So we are trying to reach out the US government, all the levels, to reconsider these decisions. And this morning, actually, our Prime Minister had a telephone conversation with the President Trump, and the Prime Minister said that Japan has been the really world largest investor to the United States for 5 years, consecutive years, and we have strong concern about these type of measures. And then it will weaken the Japanese companies who have been investing in the United States, so that it might affect the future increase of future possibility of the investment to the United States. So Prime Minister also mentioned that we really urge the U.S. government to reconsider reconsideration of these measures. We not really get any specific response in this request. We just decided to continue our conversation, consultations on these issues, continue to be very candid and hopefully constructive discussions. But so far, nothing really happened. The Japanese government is trying to taking several measures. If those companies who have been impacted by this type increase, Japanese government start to making some the supportive measures for those companies who have been impacted this tariffs, but still in the very early stage, and each companies must have analyzing the impact of these tariffs and to their products and how it really impacting our bilateral trade. So we are really concerned about the situations.
Got it. And Wendy, even though April 2nd doesn't, actually for Canada was before. So altogether, not just April 2nd, but before, how does it affect Canada?
Yeah, so we actually got away quite lucky on April 2nd in comparison to what had happened at the beginning of the year. So, I mean, Canada was subject to retaliatory tariffs as early as March 4th, and then retaliated as a result. There's talk about uncertainty. It's a day-to-day change in the tariff landscape between the U.S. and Canada. The U.S. put tariffs in place on March 4th against Canada, but by March 7th, I believe it was, 2 or 3 days later, those were scaled back so that they apply only to products from Canada that don't qualify for the USMCA, the Free Trade Agreement. That's interesting because it sounds good, and there's a lot of confusion because people don't deal with tariffs every day, so they didn't really understand, well, what's the impact of that? There's about 60% of products that come from Canada that they may qualify for USMCA, but no one went through the analysis to find out if they did, because it's pretty complex, especially if you're dealing with products that have a lot of different inputs and a lot of foreign inputs. It's not a simple thing to figure out. And we try to impress on our clients that you can't just sign a statement of origin saying that your product qualifies without actually going through that analysis, because that would be bad and fraudulent. So, so there was still a huge impact. And then on March 12th, we were also, and so would other countries have been impacted by the steel and aluminum tariffs, so 25% tariff on steel and aluminum, and also derivative products of steel and aluminum, which from a Canadian perspective is very significant because of the volume of steel and aluminum trade. So although we weren't subject to, well, we were, automobiles and auto parts were also made the subject of tariffs soon after the April 2nd reciprocal tariffs, which again, has a huge impact on our economy. Canada has retaliated in relation to that. I think there's a small part of, it sounds cruel and evil, but there's a small part of Canadians that were happy to see other countries become the subject of tariffs, and very happy to be supported in retaliatory efforts, just from, almost there's one, we're going to talk about supply chain and the technicalities of it and the uncertainty and how complex it is, but there was also a very, very strong emotional response in Canada that I think a lot of people don't appreciate. No matter what happens with the tariffs, a ton of goodwill has been lost in the world. And it's very, very significant from a Canadian perspective. There's a huge Buy Canadian campaign. And I know we're not alone in that. The same types of forces are happening elsewhere. But also the impact on travel from Canada to the U.S. and tourism has been enormous. I actually have a home in Palm Springs that I spend time in the winter, and it was just this last week that people were starting to recognize the impact. And now there's "We love Canadians" signs up everywhere in Palm Springs, which is really, really lovely to see. But it's very significant from that perspective. So it's more than just an economic war. It feels like a little bit of a war, which is really, I think, the saddest thing for Canadian staff to experience. So I just wanted to start there, and I know we'll talk more about the actual supply chain impacts as we go along.
Yeah, we love our snowbirds from Canada. That's
Thank
what
you.
coming in. So
we
want to
love
keep
being here.
Yeah, but I think as you're talking, one of the things you mentioned is in terms of the uncertainty, right? I think the thing that's certain is that there will be uncertainty in coming months, and unfortunately for maybe our president has learned from one of the greatest TV talk show hosts, Oprah. You get a tariff, you get a tariff, you get a tariff. Everybody gets a tariff, right? So now on the same page. So with that said, Okko-Pekka, how is it affecting Finland?
Well, I very much have shared the history of Kenko, having worked with trade policy. but there are significant behind-the-border issues in international trade. And of course, one of the issues I might be interested in learning more is about regulation in general, but also tax breaks and subsidies. And Finnish companies here are extremely interested in clean and digital transition. And we know that during the previous government, there was strong incentive packages, IRA and IIJA. So, but if California goes more into a direction of providing more support, etc., so level playing field is now shaking more. So I think there might be possibilities also for state of California to address the concerns of international business behind the border.
That's great. Others, thoughts in terms of California governor's statements about California maybe countering some of that and developing that relationship? Are there any actions that, in your recommendation, that can be taken by California to counter that a little bit?
It's actually outreach. We had just our ambassador meeting Governor Newsom last week, and they talked extensively, obviously, about the situation, as well as about partnerships on a subnational level. So outreach, I would always say, is one thing. California has always been very active in reaching out to international partners who share the same value or who share a similar economic outlook. And as California has been so much at the forefront of renewable energy and zero emission technology, I think it's a very natural fit for a lot of us.
Great. Well, I think, of course, it's the sharing the same positions and to sharing the concerns and to get support for the international trade is really important from the state of California to share with us. And we are now trying to get some information from the Japanese companies here, what sort of impact they have. Eventually, it will be affecting those workers in those Japanese companies located in Southern California, so that I will try to get some information what sort of the impact or the damage that those companies have been having. And then I'd like to share those information with those, especially for those elected officials, that is really not really helping the U.S. economy, it's just hurting the American U.S. economy. And of course, it's very nice that the California do some financial support for those Japanese companies or the companies who have been affected by the trade impact. It's not only for the foreign companies, but for those who are affected by those measures. That might be one option, but of course, it's not that easy to do that. Yeah. But I think at least we can share the concerns and to work together and reaching out the people who really having the common views on the trade.
Got it.
I think government procurement is definitely an area that, to the extent it's at the state level. One thing that happened in Canada is that there's not just retaliation in terms of tariffs, but also in terms of procurement at the provincial level. So a lot of U.S. companies are feeling that they won't be able to bid on certain contracts and things like that. Now, if there was a reciprocation on the part of California to ensure that procurement markets are open, I'm sure there would be an opportunity for reciprocation at the provincial level as well. So that's one area. The other is services. I mean, many green technologies and engineering all relates to services versus trading goods. And you could definitely promote that very heavily without being impacted as much by tariffs. Sometimes it's impacted on the side because sometimes you need certain goods to deliver your services. So it's not like it's without impact, but it's certainly much less impacted. And it's a question we get from clients a lot, is to what extent do the tariffs impact services? And this could change. I hope it doesn't. I hope this doesn't bleed over into taxes on services, but so far tariffs are goods, so that's a good area to explore as well.
So earlier, before this panel, we had a pitch session with international companies talking about their products, and one of those companies actually from Canada, Latenda, talked about having partnership in the United States for the manufacturing side, just in case there's a Buy America provision, right? The administration's strategy seems to emphasize a lot on economic independence as well as reshoring of industries. I think there's a lot of discussion from our economists around the world basically talking about the practicality of very quickly reshoring or manufacturing here. Can you talk a little bit in terms of how businesses or policymakers from your regions and your countries are responding to this shift? Are they taking any measures to manufacture here?
Well, you know, when our Prime Minister visited the United States in February at a summit meeting, and at that time, our Prime Minister announced that Japan tried to increase or elevate our investment to the United States, unprecedented level of $1 trillion. Yeah. And actually, we already invested in the United States around 800 billion already. Oh, 800 billion already. Wow. So that's another 200 billion to add more. It's just before this announcement of the tariffs, so that we are in the trend of increasing the investment here in the United States. But we also talk with some Japanese the business people that having a new investment takes time. Maybe it takes 3, 4 years, 5 years. So it's not that easy to shift their supply chains, bring everything in the United States. It's not happen overnight. Yeah. It takes time. 4 years after, we are not sure what will happen. Yeah. But in general trend, if it is the economically viable, of course, we are ready to encourage Japanese companies to invest here in the United States.
So I think it all comes down to the broader point that we live in a globalized world where supply chains are very closely connected with each other, closely connected, and markets are intertwined. And speaking for Germany, I can only say, like, from the experience we had after Russia invaded Ukraine, we had to reduce dependencies on Russia within a very short amount of time, which seemed almost unlikely. We managed to do so at a pretty high price, but in the end it was good, of course, as a result. But it's not that easy, like Kenko just said. I think the US knows very well from the example of China that there are certain dependencies on China, be it rare earth or something, some minerals. You just have to look to diversify your markets, diversify your sources, and that takes time. So it's nothing that you can change from one day to another, and it's nothing that you can necessarily change at all, because it's just that the market is global, a global market, unlike like 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Maybe I can continue on what I actually said already earlier. So we do think that nearshoring, friendshoring, that will continue. And we do think that security will play even a more stronger role in the supply chains. At the same time, the situation is now, it's more complicated than it was before. And when it comes to, like Kenko and Andrea said, when it comes to new investments, they are long-term decisions. So we have already in pipeline one EV investment to California that has been there for a while, and I don't think this will change. I think it continues. At the same time, I don't see any new investment proposals because of the current trade crisis, trade war, and I think it's more or less a war. I have a great hesitation as trade policies to say trade war, but what we are seeing now in the news actually gives me more comfort to say that's actually the word that can be used. But it's perhaps there is a possibility to also for California, based on what has been said before, to consider what kind of international role California wants to play in the field of supply chains. And we all know, based on the lessons learned from the pandemic and also from the great power competition, which was heated up, that there's no such thing than total decoupling of the economies. We are intertwined. the European Union and United States is extremely intertwined. The companies, as you know, they are the most ones which are worried because they are operating in the same places, and the markets. It's trade in services and investment and goods, intellectual property, and also, that's it. So one has to be optimistic even at this stage, and maybe we can, with Andrea, remind that was the offer of the president of the European Commission. She made an offer of why don't we come back to the idea of lowering tariffs actually and leveling the playing field. And a good reminder is that 15 years ago there was a TTIP exercise, and 30 years ago TEP exercise. So they were aiming at a transatlantic free marketplace. The goal is still there.
Yeah, so I think it really depends on a company-by-company basis. It's difficult for a lot of Canadian companies because their primary market overall, not their primary export market, their primary market is the United States. So for those companies, they are definitely going to be looking at onshoring their businesses. But there's a huge amount of complications. There's tax concerns. There's even, the stability of employment, for example, ability to have employees, and maybe California has an advantage from that perspective in terms of what it can offer as an investment location. But to your point, there's also a cascade. You have to wonder whether it's a good place to build something if everything you want to source in order to build that either has to come from the United States or be subject to a high tariff. Like, it's a very constraining environment and not what would normally be seen as a hospitable environment to manufacture in if tariffs will be maintained. I mean, you have to think of all these things. I think there's also a concern about the broader investment climate in terms of repatriation of funds, and what could happen next. And that's the business uncertainty. I mean, no one wants, I almost hesitate to say it because I'm scared someone will pick it up as the next great idea, right? But I mean, that is a concern definitely, and relates to the overall stability of the investment climate. But maybe that's something California can offer.
As you guys are talking, it's very clear that the supply chain, the global supply chain, is so integrated, right? And it didn't happen overnight. We've been building it since the 40s and 50s, and the U.S. has been a major force driving that globalization. And now to kind of try to disentangle it, it's not as easy as some may have reported, that you can just basically turn off a switch and it will happen. Now, another disrupting factor or way to maybe leverage and change this a little bit is technology. We've seen that technological innovations such as digital supply chain management and automation can help, or maybe not. What's your thoughts and your opinion in terms of whether technological innovation can play in enhancing resiliency in light of the trade policy that we have now?
There's going to need to be some really good technology to be able to track 20% US content and not tariff it in products that have greater than 20% US content, which is how the reciprocal tariffs are said to apply. So I hope that US CBP has some really excellent technology, and if they don't, and there's anyone who can develop that technology, there'll probably be a pretty good market for it. But it's the level of complexity in the application of these tariffs is astounding. I just have our customs authorities as they are not at the forefront of technological innovation. And so to be able to apply the tariffs in the way that it's been suggested they can apply will be a heavy lift.
So a few years ago, actually, blockchain was discussed as the solution to be able to track that here in this conference. Any thoughts in terms of where the blockchain can play a role here? Maybe not. Moving on. As we're dealing with the trade policies, and one of the things that's sad to hear is the tone and also some of the words, the goodwill has been wearing out, right? These international collaboration is being tested. And one of the things that have united us, especially why it's so important for this conference, for Verdexchange, right? It's about the environmental connection, and we've all, well, not all anymore, but many folks that are still in the Paris Climate Agreement have adopted these sustainability goals. So with a focus on reassuring and altering supply chain because of the tariff policy, how can countries ensure that these changes are aligned still with the sustainability goals and minimize the environmental impact? Because sometimes these trade agreements actually help us reach some of these environmental policies, and stepping away from it can have actually detrimental effects as well. Thoughts? Please.
It's merits to be said that NAFTA was the first trade agreement to have an environmental clause, giving it giving a possibility to restrict trade on environmental basis. And of course, we have in an international trading system, there has been attempts to have a plurilateral or multilateral agreement without success. And so far we have the regional and bilateral arrangements. But not only the right to protect is important, also the positive side, so providing preferential market access to environmental goods, services, and also intellectual property rights. So that is important, and it's still there because it certainly, protectionism doesn't equal a better level of environmental protection. I would claim the opposite. If you stop the movement of the best possible environmental goods and services, it will be harmful. So it's still they need to be addressed. And I mentioned the clean and digital transition here in the California market, we need to have international rules for technology. We need to have harmonization to at least a certain point, etc. These will not go away. They're still there, and I'm sure that there will be a critical mass of countries who consider that it's not only important, but it's irreplaceable to negotiate on these and to have agreements that there is a level playing field and there is a free flow of the best technology from the environmental perspective.
I think it's a sort of balancing act. If I may give you an example from Germany, under the government, which is now coming to an end, we introduced legislation that sort of set a certain standard with regards to supply chains and the obligation of companies to comply with, for example, human rights standards or SDGs or something else, some other very important standards. And we had a huge debate on it in Germany because a lot of companies actually claimed that it put a huge burden on them to sort of be able to give transparent information on which part they produced where and under which circumstances and sort of justify themselves. That debate, I think, from my perspective at least, hasn't been fully solved. I just want to show you that there are factors that play on both sides of the game. Yeah. So you got to find strike some sort of a balance in on the one hand protecting certain standards which are at the core of our democracies also and at the core of the SDGs too, and on the other side also not, like Okko-Pekka just said, not prevent companies from doing business.
Got it.
I think that Okko-Pekka mentioned about the environmental goods and services. I was the one who was in the negotiation of the WTO environmental goods and services. And although we are not really successful, after that we have some, I think in APEC they identify those environmental goods. And each country voluntarily reduce the tariffs for those products, so that there is a list of those products. So no matter what happened in the tariffs, but at least we can identify, and those products is good for your economy and to even in trading those products or the services. I think it will be better to continue that works. And recently now Japan is really promoting hydrogen technologies here in this region. That the environment good list has not taken into account of those hydrogen technologies maybe, so that we can also think about how those hydrogen technologies can be also been applied for the future. If you are ready to reduce tariffs, then those are the products or the technology that we can share each other. And you know, in the last Trump administration, when the Trump left from the Trans-Pacific Partnership (TPP), everybody really worried, but we tried to make that happen even without the United States. So it's really also important to coordinate with those like-minded countries to never give up, to bring the goodwill be prevail.
Yeah.
We will have agreement with EU, trade agreement, including the environment sections as well, and the TPP there, and then of course we have the Canada is the membership. So, and also we are now working with like the Quad collaboration. Yeah. So I don't know whether anybody from India is here, but those the countries we can really working together to bring something better for the environment as well.
Well, don't give up on us yet. We're still here fighting. So as we're closing out the panel, you're now standing between cocktails. So going to ask, I started the panel trying to uplift and try to make light because it's a hard topic, right? Because there's a lot of challenges. Hopefully we can uplift everybody as we're walking out to libations. Looking ahead, what collaborative approaches can nations pursue so that we can balance national interests with the benefits of globalization that, again, we've been building since the 40s and the 50s together, and with the goal of aiming for a more stable and equitable international trade environment? What approaches would you recommend that we all can take? Why don't we start here again?
Well, I think the EU is actually the best example because we have a single integrated market with a lot of advantages. We've benefited a lot from growth, prosperity, and stability in the past decades since the EU was founded. So that's a really good example. And we're actually adhering to the principles of free trade without borders. So I think the success of the European Union speaks for itself.
Thank you. Okay.
Well, well, at least as I mentioned, that like the TPP or various international agreement, that what we have been trying to achieve is for the tariffs, we are aiming to reduce the tariffs, and then one of the important part is that we are will support and the strengthening the rule-based international economic order. President Trump met with the Dodgers team. So sports may bring something good for us. Go Dodgers.
Yeah, I think we have to redefine the concept of what's in the national interest, especially when it comes to environmental products and services, because it is truly in the best interest of a country to procure those environmental costs or products and services at the lowest cost possible for your economy, and not to preserve domestic production that's costly and inefficient. And if everyone had that mindset, we could do so much more. And that requires a realignment of what's considered a permissible subsidy, for example, and other trade issues like that. But if we seem to, unfortunately, we're going in the opposite direction to that, but that is the direction we were headed. It should be the direction we're headed, and I think everyone has to stay the course, even if not everyone is staying the course.
Well, this is a conference of green technology investment and policies, etc. So I still claim that, first of all, of course, there needs to be political will, and then there needs to be both stick and carrot, enabling and mandatory regulation. But then you need to have, of course, you need to have the consumers and the companies on your side. But I would I'm looking forward to hear more stronger voices from the business community here in the United States, but also of the consumers. So I'm a strong believer in democracy. I think that will prevail, and it will get up those ideas that are progressive ones. And it's true that when we talk about environmental protection, at some point you need to regulate. You need to put the government's hand, and this is perhaps not the way to do it. But I do believe that the political will come through that, and let's say the good reason will prevail.
Well, thank you so much for your thoughts, your insights. And as we're closing, one of the thoughts as we're talking about the connections, right? The reason why we started this conference today, we're talking about, is the Verdexchange. It's about exchange. And I hope that our exchanges, our human-to-human interaction, can help us keep going through this difficult time. And it reminded me that a few years ago now, President Obama went to visit Japan and utilized, I think back then Japan called it sushi diplomacy. To tie folks together using food and culture. We stole that, and actually when we did a trade mission to Mexico, we actually brought one of our biggest, most important exports, Panda Express, to Mexico. We opened over 200 Panda Express all over Mexico. I termed it the orange chicken diplomacy. Now, I think what we need to do is depend more on the Shohei diplomacy and other things to help us bring it together, but that's just one example. We hope to be able to do a lot more of this. Thank you so much for your insights. Again, we're going to get through this together, and now, time for drinks. Thank you so much.